Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the use of religious art and its inestimable value to Christendom. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti, Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. So I wanted to talk about this because I recently went to Chicago, as some of you know, and where I live in Texas, we have some of the old churches, the churches that were built in the early 1900s or even older. But as a whole, most of the churches that I grew up in were suburban churches. And if you go to our 5-part series now on liturgical abuses that drive me crazy, you know how I feel about the stripping away of stained glass and art in general. And I think it does a great disservice. Most of my life, I've gone to what Father McTeague, who interviewed me graciously on the Catholic Current, his radio show, calls Our Lady of Suburbia churches. I've gone most of my life to Our Lady of Suburbia churches, and the large majority of them don't use stained glass. And or if they did have stained glass, it's that just like almost like mosaics. There's like no painting, or maybe they'll have like two hands shaking, or maybe the Holy Spirit, if we're lucky, they'll have the dove or the elements, something like that. And you go to Europe, you even go to the old churches here in America. I did that video over at the Cathedral in Chicago, and of course they got rid of the religious art over there and put in just the bland stained glass. And it's interesting because go to that episode, I forgot to mention there. So in 1968, they started the renovation of Holy Name. And that was the year that they announced that the Novus Ordo Mass, the vernacular Mass, was going to be rolled out in 1969. So they kind of already knew, it's like, okay, we're bringing this new Mass. Let's gut the corpus, the crucifix, and they put in that weird Jesus in wood. And then they did that creepy looking tabernacle, and then they just got rid of the stained glass. So most of you guys, unless you go to an SSPX or maybe an ordinariate church, or you just go to an old parish, stained glass that actually teaches is rare, like religious art. Now, some of you who do go to those churches, you know how beautiful they are. I mean, nobody can deny that churches that have statuary and that have stained glass, that have depictions of Jesus or Mary or the saints, is edifying and beneficial to our faith. Think about it. If you go back to the Romanesque buildings, 1,000 years ago, or Gothic about 200, 300 years later in 1200s, they intentionally put this stuff in. Baroque too. Go to the Jesuit church in Rome, man, that is very Baroque-esque, the Jesu church over there. But either way, I mean, we kind of understood. The majority of the people were illiterate. They couldn't read. They got to learn the faith. We got to catechize them with the faith. What better way than stained glass? Stained glass makes the churches look beautiful, whether it be at sunrise or sunset. But more importantly, we get to teach the children, teach the illiterate about the stories from the Bible. Because remember, they would read the stories and people would hear them. But just like with movies, sometimes when you read a book, it's great, you kind of use your imagination, but sometimes it helps to see the movie and kind of see what these things look like. So with stained glass and religious art, stories from the Bible in it, it just helps us get closer to our faith, because we see a stained glass, or let's say a religious painting. If you go to Rome, think of the Sistine Chapel, or a Piazza del Popolo, the churches there. Caravaggio has his paintings, or just innumerable churches in Europe that have masterpieces from various painters. And we have the playlist here on painting. What they brought, you would see a beautiful painting of the Annunciation. Think of Botticelli's Annunciation. We have a treatment on that. Or you think of El Greco, or you think of Caravaggio, or you think of Da Vinci's Last Supper, or Poussin, or whoever, Raphael. All these guys, Fra Angelico. All of them painted in churches. And aside from them doing it for the greater glory of God, they did it because it was understood. The pastors, the bishops, the curia in general understood that the best way to teach the faith is through stained glass. So you see the Annunciation, you see the crucifixion, you can see Jesus ascending into heaven, you see scenes like him turning water into wine. or you see the resurrection. I mean, these are common ones. Or you'll see the saints, just poses of the different saints in the stained glass. And certainly there'll be Marian ones too. And these are beautiful. And it's a shame that with the modernist reform of the spirit of Vatican II, because I'm not going to necessarily blame Vatican II, because if you look at the paperwork of Vatican II, it's not as liberal as the spirit that took it over was. They gutted all that. And I've mentioned this book. I mentioned it recently, Ugliest Sin by Michael Rose. I read that 20 years ago. I really recommend that you look into that book. And it talks about why they got rid of the stained glass. But it hasn't benefited most churches. And I think most of you guys who watch my channel are traditionalists. And most of you guys like statuary. Most of you guys like stained glass because they teach and they help connect us to those people, Jesus, to the saints. You think of like Baptists, no offense to Baptists, but you walk into a Baptist church and it's, white walls, pretty much nothing in there at all. And certainly you can pray to Jesus there, but this is the reason why the early church up into modern church has statues of Jesus, statues of the saints. Statues, of course, of the Virgin Mary, because when we're meditating, think of the Stations of the Cross. When we're meditating on Jesus' suffering, it's just easier when you have a visual representation of it. And we're not worshiping the statues. Go to those episodes, we have plenty of those. We're not worshiping the plaster. It's just like when you look at a picture of your dead grandma, it helps you think of your dead grandma. You look at a flag, it helps you think of patriotism or whatever. It's the same thing. So I think we all lament the fact that most churches now have gutted, at least for about 40, 50 years, have gutted the statuary and the stained glass. And it's a shame because stained glass and statuary is what taught people the faith since Constantine legalized the church and they were able to move into those old Roman basilicas and we were able to build our own churches since then. And I'm not going to say, and we just did that episode on the deposit of faith, that major chasm between the deposit of faith and regular Catholics. I would say that there is some sort of correlation between the poor catechesis and the uniform ignorance of the large majority of Catholics to perhaps stained glass and statuary, because when they walk into most churches of Our Lady of Suburbia, they just see essentially a Protestant-looking church, and again, we're not really going to go into politics there, but it's nothing that's edifying. And every Catholic, whether you're liberal or not, when you walk in to St. Mary Maggiore, if you walk into Notre Dame before it was burnt, or you walk into St. Peter's, or you walk in, if you live in a big city, to the old cathedral, you do feel something. It does make a difference. And I would just exhort all Catholic architects or firms that the diocese hire to build new churches, please go back to the traditional basilican art form that we've been using for 1,700 years. Please go back to that. Guys, post in the comments. Let me know if you like stained glass, if you don't like stained glass, if you disagree with me. Please hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Share with other people. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.